My name is Jessica Morgan. I'm a 34-year-old elementary school teacher at Westlake Elementary in Seattle, Washington. I've always loved teaching. There's something special about watching a child's eyes light up when they finally grasp a concept they've been struggling with. But this isn't a story about teaching. At least, not in the traditional sense. This is a story about what happens when the people who are supposed to protect you become the ones you need protection from. I grew up in Bellevue, the middle child of Linda and Robert Morgan. We lived in a 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a white picket fence, the picture-perfect American family home. I had an older brother, Michael, who moved to Boston for work years ago, and my younger sister, Rachel. I believed family meant safety and unconditional love. Until March 12, 2024, when everything I thought I knew about my family shattered like glass. There I was, soaked through to the bone, clutching my 7-year-old son Tommy's jacket outside my sister Rachel's townhouse on Lake Union. The rain pounded against my skin, mixing with tears I couldn't hold back. Through the window, I could see my parents laughing, glasses of wine in hand, while my son trembled beside me, his small body convulsing with cold and fear. What I did next changed all our lives forever. To understand how we got here, you need to know about Rachel Hayes, my brilliant, successful, utterly ruthless younger sister. 3 years my junior at 30, Rachel had always been the golden child. She graduated from Stanford Law with honors and quickly climbed the ranks at Whitfield Legal Group, one of Seattle's most prestigious law firms. By 30, she was already making partner and pulling in a mid-6-figure salary. Our parents never missed an opportunity to remind me how accomplished their youngest daughter was. "Jessica," my mother would say over Sunday dinner, passing the roast beef that Rachel barely touched because she was watching her figure. "Do you know your sister just closed a 7-figure deal for the firm? Isn't that wonderful?" I would smile and nod, pretending not to notice how my achievements, becoming a tenured teacher, raising a kind-hearted son on my own after my husband Mark died from pancreatic cancer 4 years ago, seemed to pale in comparison. Rachel lived in a sleek townhouse overlooking Lake Union, drove a Tesla, and spent her holidays in places like Bali and the Maldives. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queen Anne, drove a 10-year-old Subaru, and spent my holidays grading papers and making Christmas ornaments with Tommy. But I was content with my life. Tommy was my world, a sweet, curious boy with his father's warm brown eyes and my unruly dark curls. He loved dinosaurs, space, and building elaborate truck courses through our living room. He was loud sometimes. What 7-year-old isn't? But he was kind and considerate in ways that mattered. Rachel, on the other hand, had never been fond of children. When Tommy was born, she sent an expensive silver rattle from Tiffany's, but didn't visit until he was 3 months old. Even then, she held him at arm's length, as if he might soil her pristine Burberry blouse. As Tommy grew older, Rachel's distaste for him became more apparent. She'd flinch when he ran through a room or grimace when he laughed too loudly. "Can't you control him?" she'd ask, her voice dripping with disdain. "He's like a wild animal." I'd apologize, even though I didn't think I should have to. Tommy was just being a child. But in Rachel's world, children were accessories to be seen and not heard, preferably dressed in miniature designer clothes and displayed like perfect little dolls. My parents, Linda and Robert, sided with Rachel. Of course, after retiring from his engineering job at Boeing, my father had taken to golf and expensive whiskey, while my mother filled her days with garden club meetings and book clubs, where more wine was consumed than books discussed. They'd become even more enamored with Rachel's lifestyle and success in recent years, frequently accepting her invitations to high-end restaurants and exclusive events where they could brag about their daughter, the lawyer. I was the family disappointment, the one who got pregnant too young at 26, despite being married and financially stable, the one who chose teaching over a real career, the one who needed to get it together after Mark died, as if grieving were an inconvenience to their social calendar. The pattern had been established long before Tommy came along. When I was struggling to pay for graduate school, I asked my parents for help. They told me they couldn't afford it because they were helping Rachel with the down payment on her first condo. Yet somehow, they found money to join Rachel on a cruise through the Greek Isles that same summer. When I needed a loan to cover medical bills after Mark's insurance claim was initially denied, Rachel offered to help me understand the paperwork. Instead of the financial assistance I desperately needed, I ended up taking out a second mortgage on our apartment, while Rachel posted Instagram photos of her new summer home on Lake Chelan. Despite everything, I kept trying. I'd bring Tommy to family gatherings, hoping that somehow my parents would see what I saw, a beautiful, intelligent child who deserved their love and attention. I made excuses for their behavior, told myself they were just from a different generation, that they showed love in different ways. I convinced myself that maintaining family ties was important for Tommy, that having grandparents and an aunt in his life would enrich him somehow. What a fool I was. The first real warning sign came at Thanksgiving 2023. We were at Rachel's place. She insisted on hosting, though her sleek, minimalist dining room with its white furniture and glass tabletops seemed designed to repel children. Tommy, excited about the holiday, was telling everyone about his school's Thanksgiving play where he played a pilgrim. And then I said, "We are thankful for this bountiful harvest," he demonstrated, his voice rising with enthusiasm. Rachel visibly winced. "Indoor voice. Tommy," she snapped. "Not everyone wants to hear every detail of your little play." Tommy's face fell, and I felt that familiar maternal surge of protectiveness. "He's just excited. Rachel, it's Thanksgiving." "Well, I'm thankful for peace and quiet," she retorted, pouring herself another glass of Pinot Noir. My mother chimed in. "Rachel works very hard, Jessica. She deserves to relax in her own home without all this noise." The message was clear. Tommy's happiness was less important than Rachel's comfort. I should have left then, packed up our things and never returned. But I didn't. I swallowed my anger, soothed Tommy's hurt feelings, and stayed for pumpkin pie. The incidents accumulated. At Christmas, Rachel gave Tommy a complex Lego set, then berated him for spreading the pieces on her pristine white carpet. On Valentine's Day, when Tommy brought handmade cards for everyone, Rachel tossed hers aside without reading it, claiming she had important emails to check. Each time, my parents would side with Rachel, offering weak excuses for her behavior or suggesting I was being too sensitive. Then came March 12th, 2024, the day everything changed. Rachel had invited us all for dinner at her place, ostensibly to celebrate her latest promotion. It was unusual for her to include Tommy and me in these gatherings, but my parents insisted we come. "Your sister is making an effort," my mother said. "The least you can do is meet her halfway." So we went. Tommy was on his best behavior, wearing the button-up shirt and khakis I'd bought specially for the occasion. He brought a small gift for Rachel, a picture frame he'd decorated in art class, containing a photo of the two of them from last summer's reluctant family picnic. Rachel had accepted it with a tight smile and placed it on a side table, far from her carefully curated display of art books and crystal sculptures. Dinner was tense but manageable. Rachel served roasted salmon that Tommy picked at cautiously, and my parents dominated the conversation with tales of their latest cruise. After dessert, store-bought tiramisu that Rachel claimed was from this darling little Italian bakery downtown, we moved to the living room. Tommy had brought his favorite toy truck, a small red fire engine that had belonged to his father. It was his comfort object, something he carried everywhere. I'd told him he could play quietly with it if he got bored during adult conversation, and he sat on the floor near the fireplace, rolling it back and forth and making soft, whooshing noises. Rachel was in the middle of describing her latest courtroom victory, my parents hanging on her every word, when she suddenly stopped mid-sentence. "What is that noise?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing at Tommy. He looked up, startled. "Sorry, Aunt Rachel, I'm just playing with my truck." "Well, stop it. It's incredibly distracting, and I'm trying to tell a story." Tommy nodded and set the truck down beside him, but a moment later, he absent-mindedly began rolling it again, the soft sound barely audible beneath my father's booming laugh at something Rachel had said. That's when it happened. Rachel stood up abruptly, marched over to Tommy, and snatched the truck from his hands. "I said stop," she hissed, her face contorted with rage. "I'm sorry," Tommy whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "Please give it back. It was my dad's." "I don't care whose it was. You need to learn to listen when adults are speaking." Tommy reached for the truck, and Rachel shoved him, hard. He fell backward, hitting his head on the edge of the stone fireplace with a sickening thud. "Rachel!" I gasped, rushing to Tommy's side. A small cut had opened on his temple, blood trickling down his pale cheek. But Rachel wasn't done. As I helped Tommy to his feet, she grabbed his arm, yanked him away from me, and dragged him toward the front door. "Maybe you need to cool off outside until you can behave properly," she snarled, flinging open the door. Rain was pouring down, a typical Seattle spring storm, turning the world gray and miserable. "No, please," Tommy cried, but Rachel pushed him onto the covered porch and slammed the door, locking it with a decisive click. I stood frozen in shock for one terrible moment, unable to process what had just happened. Then I snapped back to reality and lunged for the door. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my hand on the lock. "It's freezing out there, and he's hurt." Rachel blocked my way, her tall frame imposing in her designer suit. "He needs to learn there are consequences for misbehavior." "He's 7 years old, and he wasn't misbehaving." I tried to push past her, but she held firm. That's when I heard it. Laughter. I turned to see my parents, still seated on Rachel's expensive white sofa, chuckling as if they'd just witnessed an amusing sitcom scenario rather than child abuse. "Mom? Dad?" I said incredulously. "Aren't you going to say something?" My mother wiped a tear of mirth from her eye. "Oh, Jessica, don't be so dramatic. A little rain never hurt anyone. Tommy needs to learn to respect other people's homes." "He needs discipline," my father added. "Rachel's right to set boundaries." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These people, my family, were laughing while my son stood injured and frightened in the rain. Something broke inside me at that moment, some final thread of hope that they might change, that they might ever truly love Tommy or me. "Move," I told Rachel, my voice deadly calm. Perhaps surprised by my tone, she stepped aside. I unlocked the door and rushed out to Tommy, who stood shivering on the porch, his hair plastered to his forehead, blood mingling with rainwater on his face. "I'm sorry, Mommy," he sobbed as I gathered him into my arms. "I didn't mean to be loud." "You did nothing wrong," I assured him, my heart breaking at his unnecessary guilt. "Nothing at all." I took off my cardigan and wrapped it around his shoulders, then turned back to the house. Through the window, I could see Rachel had rejoined my parents on the couch. They were still laughing, toasting each other with wine glasses as if celebrating some victory. That was when I knew I wouldn't stay silent anymore. This wasn't just about me and the lifetime of slights and disappointments I'd endured. This was about Tommy, an innocent child being harmed by the people who should have protected him. Something had to be done. I took Tommy to the emergency room at Harborview Medical Center, where Dr. Anjali Patel treated his cut with butterfly stitches and examined him for a concussion. Thankfully, his injury wasn't serious, but Dr. Patel noticed the bruises forming on his arm where Rachel had grabbed him. "How did these happen?" she asked, her dark eyes serious and concerned. I hesitated only briefly before telling her the truth. Dr. Patel listened without judgment, then quietly handed me some pamphlets on child abuse reporting and suggested I document everything. "Even if you don't decide to report this now, you should have a record," she advised. That night, as Tommy slept in my bed, curled against me for security, I lay awake, my mind racing. I'd spent my entire life trying to please my family, making excuses for their behavior, accepting their judgment and criticism. And what had it gotten me? A traumatized son and a persistent feeling of worthlessness. No more. The next morning, I called in sick to work and kept Tommy home from school. While he rested, I made 3 important phone calls. First, I called Marisol Reyes, an attorney I'd met through a single parent support group. Marisol had left Whitfield Legal Group 2 years earlier to start her own practice focusing on family law. She knew Rachel by reputation and had no love lost for my sister's cutthroat tactics. What Rachel did constitutes assault and child endangerment, Marisol told me after hearing my story. And your parents were accessories. We can file for a restraining order immediately. Second, I called Dr. Patel to request copies of Tommy's medical records from the previous night. She promised to expedite them, adding, "I'm legally obligated to report suspected child abuse. Jessica, I want you to know that I'll be filing a report today." Finally, I called Sarah Williams, my principal at Westlake Elementary. Sarah had been a mentor and friend since I'd started teaching there 8 years ago. She listened quietly as I explained what had happened and what I needed to do. "Take all the time you need," she said. "Your classroom is covered. Focus on Tommy now." With these allies in place, I began gathering evidence. I took photos of Tommy's injuries, the cut on his temple, the finger-shaped bruises on his arm, the small bump on the back of his head where he'd hit the fireplace. I wrote down a detailed account of the incident while it was still fresh in my memory, including the shocking reaction of my parents. But I knew it wasn't enough. It would be Rachel's word against mine, and Rachel was very good at twisting the truth. She was a lawyer. After all, I needed more. What I didn't tell anyone, not even Marisol, was that this wasn't the first incident. There had been others, smaller perhaps, but still concerning, and I had evidence. Last Christmas, I'd given Rachel a digital photo frame as a gift. What she didn't know was that I'd modified it slightly. The frame doubled as a security camera, activated by movement and sound. I'd originally bought it to keep an eye on our apartment when Tommy and I were away, but after witnessing Rachel's increasingly hostile behavior toward Tommy, I'd reprogrammed it and given it to her instead. It wasn't my proudest moment, installing surveillance without someone's knowledge, but my maternal instincts had been screaming that something wasn't right, and I'd learned to trust those instincts. The camera had captured several disturbing incidents over the past few months. Rachel shoving Tommy when she thought no one was looking. Rachel pinching his arm hard enough to leave marks when he accidentally spilled water on her coffee table. Rachel threatening him in a low, menacing voice. "If you tell your mother, I'll make sure she loses her job." The photo frame was still on that side table in Rachel's living room. It had almost certainly captured everything that happened yesterday. Getting the footage wouldn't be easy. Rachel never left her house unlocked, and I didn't have a key, but I did have something else. I knew her schedule, every Thursday evening. Rachel attended a spin class at Flywheel Sports downtown, followed by drinks with colleagues. She always posted about it on Instagram, part of her carefully curated social media presence. Tomorrow was Thursday. While Tommy stayed with a trusted neighbor the following evening, I drove to Rachel's townhouse and parked a block away. I wore dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low over my face, feeling like a character in one of those spy movies Tommy loved. At 6:45 p.m., right on schedule, Rachel's Tesla pulled out of her driveway. I gave her 10 minutes to get safely away, then approached the house. Getting in was easier than I expected. In her arrogance, Rachel had hidden a spare key and a fake rock in her meticulously landscaped garden, the same hiding spot our parents had used at our childhood home. Some patterns run deep. Heart pounding, I let myself in and went straight to the living room. The photo frame was still there, innocent looking among Rachel's expensive knickknacks. I quickly removed the microSD card and replaced it with a blank one I'd brought. Rachel would never notice the difference. Back in my car, I inserted the card into my laptop and held my breath as I accessed the files. There it was. Yesterday's footage, crystal clear and damning. Rachel's rage, Tommy's fear, my parents' laughter, all captured in high definition. I copied the files, then buried the memory card in my purse. This was the evidence I needed. But I wasn't done yet. There was more to my plan. Few people knew about my side business. 4 years ago, after Mark died, I'd started making handcrafted educational toys and selling them on Etsy to supplement my teaching salary. What had begun as therapy during grief had blossomed into a surprisingly lucrative venture. my shop, Cozy Crafts LLC, had cleared over $30,000 in the last quarter alone. I'd been squirreling away the profits, building a nest egg for Tommy's future and our security. That money was about to serve a different purpose. Over the next few weeks, I set my plan in motion. With Marisol's help, I filed for a temporary restraining order against Rachel. Using the medical records and my testimony as evidence, I didn't mention the video footage yet. That was for later. As expected, Rachel fought back hard. She hired Elliot Chambers, Whitfield's most aggressive litigator, who filed a counter-motion painting me as an unstable, vindictive sister jealous of Rachel's success. They claimed Tommy's injuries were the result of an accidental fall, that Rachel had merely asked him to step outside for a moment to calm down, and that I was exaggerating the incident to extort money from my successful sister. My parents, predictably, backed Rachel's version of events. They submitted affidavits describing me as an attention-seeking drama queen who had always resented Rachel's accomplishments. They claimed Tommy was undisciplined and that I was using this minor incident to drive a wedge in the family. The judge granted the temporary restraining order, but scheduled a full hearing for April 20th, 6 weeks away. In the meantime, Rachel launched a whisper campaign against me at Westlake Elementary, contacting board members she knew through her firm's pro bono work, suggesting I was mentally unstable and potentially unfit to teach. Sarah stood firmly by my side, but I could feel the sideways glances from some parents, hear the whispers that stopped when I entered the teacher's lounge. Rachel was doing what she did best, manipulating perception to suit her narrative. But two could play at that game. The annual spring benefit at Westlake Elementary was scheduled for April 18th, 2 days before our court hearing. It was a major fundraising event held at the Belmont Plaza, Seattle's premier event space, attended by parents, teachers, board members, and community leaders. Over 100 influential people who controlled the school's funding and, indirectly, my professional future. Rachel knew about the benefit. She'd made a point of telling me she'd be there to support the school, though we both knew her real purpose was to charm the board members and continue her campaign against me. My parents would be attending as well, eager to back their golden child and help destroy the black sheep. It was the perfect setting for my counter-strike. In the weeks leading up to the benefit, I poured thousands from my Etsy savings into preparation. I hired a private investigator to dig into Rachel's professional history, focusing particularly on her case files at Whitfield. I had Marisol prepare a comprehensive legal brief documenting the assault on Tommy, complete with the medical records and Dr. Ko Patel's official report to Child Protective Services. I reached out to my cousin Emma, who had been at Rachel's house the day of the Christmas incident and had witnessed Rachel pinching Tommy. Initially reluctant to get involved in family drama, Emma changed her mind when I showed her a clip from the photo frame footage. "That's not drama," she said, her face pale. "That's abuse." The night of the benefit arrived. I dressed carefully in a navy blue dress that Rachel had once mockingly called teacher chic, but I'd paired it with elegant jewelry and styled my usually practical ponytail into soft waves. I looked professional, put together, not at all like the frazzled, unstable woman Rachel had been describing to anyone who would listen. Tommy was safely staying with his best friend's family. I'd explained to him, in age-appropriate terms, that I was going to make sure Aunt Rachel couldn't hurt him again. He'd nodded solemnly and said, "It's okay, Mommy. I know you'll protect me." His simple faith in me strengthened my resolve. I arrived early to the benefit, bringing with me a sleek laptop and a small USB drive containing everything I'd gathered. Sarah met me at the entrance, concern evident in her eyes. "Are you sure about this, Jessica?" she asked. "Once you do this, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I replied. "They've left me no choice." The benefit began with the usual speeches and acknowledgments. I sat quietly at my assigned table, watching as Rachel worked the room, moving from one board member to another, her smile brittle and her eyes cold. My parents followed in her wake like well-trained dogs, nodding and laughing on cue. They studiously avoided looking in my direction. At 8:30 p.m., Sarah took the stage again to introduce the special presentation, a video about the school's achievements over the past year, which I had volunteered to create. The lights dimmed, and the projector whirred to life. For the first 3 minutes, the video proceeded as expected. Cheerful clips of students engaged in learning, teachers explaining their innovative methods, testimonials from satisfied parents. Then the screen went black, and white text appeared. What happens when those who should protect us become the ones we fear? The room fell silent as the footage from Rachel's photo frame filled the screen. There was my sister, her face contorted with rage, shoving my 7-year-old son. There was the blood trickling down his temple as he looked up at her in terror. There was Rachel dragging him to the door, pushing him outside into the rain. And there, most damning of all, were my parents, laughing as if watching a comedy show. I heard gasps around the room. Someone, I think it was the PTA president, whispered, "Oh my God." The video continued, showing the medical images of Tommy's injuries, Dr. Patel's report, and finally, a clip of Tommy himself, sitting in our living room, looking into the camera with those big brown eyes. "I tried to be quiet," he said in the video, his voice small. "I'm sorry I made Aunt Rachel mad. I didn't mean to." The screen went black again, and the lights came up. I stood and walked to the stage, my heart hammering but my steps steady. "What you just witnessed," I said, my voice clear in the stunned silence, "is what happened to my son at the hands of my sister, Rachel Hayes. On March 12th of this year, my parents, Linda and Robert Morgan, witnessed this assault and did nothing to stop it. In fact, they found it amusing." I gestured to where Rachel stood frozen by the champagne fountain. Her face drained of color. My parents sat nearby, my mother's hand pressed to her mouth, my father staring down at his plate. "I'm not sharing this to create drama or seek revenge," I continued. "I'm sharing it because silence protects abusers, because children deserve to be safe, especially from family members, and because I refuse to be gaslit into believing that what happened to my son was acceptable, appropriate, or in any way his fault." Rachel finally unfroze. "This is defamation," she screeched, storming toward the stage. "That video has been doctored. Jessica has always been jealous of me. She's mentally unstable. Ask our parents." But no one was listening to her anymore. Board members were turning away. Parents were gathering their things and moving toward me, offering support. Sarah stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder. Emma stepped forward from her table. "The video is real," she announced. "I was there at Christmas when Rachel hurt Tommy, too. I didn't speak up then, and I've regretted it ever since." Dr. Patel, whom I'd invited as my guest, stood as well. "The injuries I treated on March 12th are consistent with the events shown in that video. I filed a report with CPS, as I am legally mandated to do." The room erupted in conversation. Rachel tried again to defend herself, but her voice was drowned out by the murmurs of shock and dismay. My parents slipped quietly toward the exit, heads down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Marisol appeared at my side, having watched from the back of the room. "Well done," she murmured. "Let's see them try to paint you as unstable now." The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. The judge not only granted the permanent restraining order against Rachel, but also ordered her to pay for Tommy's medical expenses and therapy. The Washington State Bar Association opened an ethics investigation into Rachel's conduct, placing her on temporary suspension pending the results. My parents tried to apologize, claiming they didn't realize how serious the situation was and never meant to hurt Tommy. I listened to their excuses with a detachment that surprised even me, then informed them that they too were no longer welcome in our lives. They had made their choice long ago, and it wasn't us. Rachel's professional reputation collapsed overnight. The video, which several attendees had recorded on their phones during the benefit presentation, went viral on social media. Protect Tommy began trending locally, then nationally. Former clients and colleagues came forward with stories of Rachel's unethical behavior in other contexts. Whitfield Legal Group, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, placed her on indefinite leave. As for Tommy and me, we moved forward. I used some of my Etsy savings to put a down payment on a small townhouse in Ballard, a safe neighborhood with good schools. Tommy started therapy with a kind child psychologist who specialized in trauma, and slowly, the shadows in his eyes began to recede. My business flourished as supportive parents from Westlake Elementary spread the word about Cozy Crafts LLC. Sarah helped me establish a support group for parents of bullied children, which quickly became an important resource for the community. 3 months after the benefit, I received an unexpected visitor, my cousin Emma, bearing a thick manila envelope. "I found these in Aunt Linda's attic when I was helping them pack up to move," she explained, handing me the envelope. "I thought you should have them." Inside were photographs and diary entries, yellowed with age. They showed a young Rachel, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, standing outside in the rain, much as Tommy had been. Other photos showed bruises on her small arms and legs. The diary entries, written in my mother's precise handwriting, detailed discipline sessions for both Rachel and me, though Rachel's were more frequent and severe. "The cycle of abuse," Emma said sadly. "Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert did the same to Rachel, and she was doing it to Tommy." The revelation didn't excuse Rachel's actions, but it helped me understand them. That night, I wrote her a letter, not of forgiveness, but of acknowledgement. I told her about the photos, about the cycle she was perpetuating. I suggested therapy, healing. I didn't mail the letter. The restraining order prevented direct contact, but writing it helped me process my own complicated feelings. Months passed, then a year. Tommy thrived in his new school. I was nominated for Teacher of the Year at Westlake Elementary. My parents moved to Arizona, presumably to escape the cloud of shame that followed them in Seattle. Rachel, I heard through legal channels, had left Whitfield permanently and moved to Chicago to start over. The rain still falls in Seattle, drumming against our windows on dark nights. But now, instead of representing fear and betrayal, it reminds us of our strength, of the storm we weathered together. Tommy no longer flinches at loud noises or apologizes for taking up space, and I no longer make myself small to accommodate others' comfort. Sometimes, healing looks like walking away. Sometimes, it looks like speaking up. And sometimes, it looks like standing in the rain, face turned to the sky, letting the water wash away the past and clear the way for whatever comes next. That's what we did. Tommy and I, we faced the storm, and we emerged stronger for it.